Hello, Josh. So happy to have you on today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Appreciate having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to jump right in. Tell us, what is SmartAC and who do you serve?
Yeah, so smartac.com is a platform that helps contractors acquire and retain more loyal relationships, generally HVAC or plumbing contractors. And so we work with those companies for them to be able to use technology to further their businesses, both on the operational and the sales marketing side.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about what the device is? I understand that there's a physical device, there's a software component to it. You're in the space of IoT, connected devices. Tell us more.
Yeah, so these maintenance agreements are really the way that companies acquire and retain those relationships, and so currently they do that by going to the house a couple times a year and seeing how well the system's operating, and then responding accordingly. And so what we've done is we've built a software and hardware platform to help them understand with sensors 365 days a year how well the systems are operating, and then communicate with homeowners to customize effectively their maintenance schedules and their experience when it comes to those trades. And so we had to make the hardware didn't exist, so we had to make the hardware to be able to make that platform possible. And then we had to build out a software platform for the homeowner interaction, the pro the techs in the field, and then the office enterprise dashboard to be able to see everything in real time.
Very cool. So the devices are attached to a home heating and AC unit. It is measuring the health of that unit, the efficiency, et cetera. You're tracking all that data, sharing that with a provider that can maintain and potentially preemptively fix or service a unit. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I end up focusing more on the business case than the actual product itself. But yeah, I mean, we have sensors on the vents and the ductwork, and drain pans, just to be able to kind of do the thing. I always say that 80% of the value of our platform is when they've sold an ongoing relationship with a customer through a maintenance agreement, and then they walk out. Like, that's 80%. But the last 20% is, of course, having the back of the homeowner by being proactive in the way they take care of their homes.
I like to give the audience a sense of the device just so they can imagine like what you're actually selling, but completely agree that the business model is often the challenge with these types of things. So my understanding is that this isn't the original business model that you came to market with. You had a couple of pivots along the way. So tell us about that journey, and how did you end up where you're at today? And congratulations! Recently, you announced a big partnership with Teekell, one of the largest in the country in the HVAC space. So how did you get to where you're at in terms of business model?
Yeah, so while I do have a history selling and having success selling to homeowners through home services, home improvement, I wasn't a tech founder, of course, until I was. And so the first time we built a product, we really didn't do the correct research. We thought the product was great. We asked some friends, they thought it was great, and then we just built it. And then we built a second version, and then we built a third version, right? Without honestly doing a whole lot of research into what our cost to acquire would be and what the COGS was going to be. And we really didn't go about it the right way. But during that process, one or two of the features of that platform people fell in love with. And they said, look, we don't care about the core value proposition. We love this feature, the data, right? Bring us this, and we would buy this alone. And so what happened was we had to take a hard look in the mirror and say, this path is, maybe we could have made a successful business out of it, but it would have been a hardware business, no software, versus this other path that is more of a hardware software offering, where there's a lot of upside and people really want the platform. And so about 5 years ago, we hard pivoted, but we did it the right way. We spent the first 3 or 4 months just doing research and finding out how much could we make it for and what was the actual value that we could deliver. And it was very clear, honestly, it was clear in the first 1 day that the value compared to the cost was a great ratio. But then we wanted to actually, move past just those initial understandings to go ask our actual customers. And so some of the exact same people that we polled in those first 2-3 months 5 years ago are customers of ours today. So it was an exciting journey to understand the right methodology before you especially build hardware. Software, maybe you have something up and running quick and you can get feedback, but I mean, hardware, it's a 2-year effort. So I would never start a hardware company again, even though we see ourselves more as a software company. But even having a hardware component is just difficult. But it's a good moat. And so where we are now, I think, is a really good combination of the strengths of hardware for a business, and of course the strengths of software for growth and annual recurring revenue growth. So
fascinating. So the pivot from B2B, from B2C to B2B. Let's start with the insight that you had, which triggered that switch in your mind of saying, even if the customer is the end user, they're maybe not the ones that are going to be the best to buy the product or be our direct customer. Maybe we're B2B or B2B2C.
Yeah, so that's really unique to this industry, I think, in that homeowners don't care about air conditioning and plumbing. Like, they just don't really think about it until the day they really need something, right? And so the cost to acquire that we found when you're trying to sell something to homeowners in a non-demand situation, right, when they don't have a problem, is very, very high. And so what we were able to find out, though, is that while homeowners don't really care, the contractors very much do care about being able to sell to homeowners, right? And so we pivoted our thinking not from providing value to homeowners necessarily, but from what the entry point into the home would be. And that has become a B2B approach, really B2B2C, but an approach where our main core customer is actually the contractor. And we are helping that contractor give a better experience to the homeowner. So we actually have a really fun time, with my contractor background, building the platform around what a contractor would want from it. But then also with our background as a company here, building the consumer-facing side of the platform to be something that homeowners will love and will be very glad that it was provided to them by the contractor. So we really do a lot of different stuff here: hardware, software, and then B2B, and then B2B2C. But it was unique in that while the homeowner doesn't care, they do care enough when you're talking to them in person to understand the value. And then if the price is even subsidized by the contractor, it just becomes a win-win-win across all three parties.
And the value to the contractor is in strengthening that relationship. Ultimately, they're making the bulk of their money and the lifetime value of that customer with that install that happens, once every 10 or 15 years, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the entire industry is really driven by keeping a customer relationship until hopefully you can have an opportunity to sell them what they need with a new system, right? And that only happens, like you said, 12 to 15, every 12 to 15 years. And so historically what the entire industry had done is accept a loss leader scenario where they're going to the house multiple times. Because that relationship was so valuable and important to the business, they were willing to sell those visits annually at a loss, right? And so they're losing hundreds of dollars a year just to try to be present when there was a bigger ticket item where they really could make money as a company. And so what we've been able to do is trade out technician bandwidth in those situations, which is the hardest thing to scale for these businesses, especially with a lot of older, techs retiring and things like that, and trade that out with technology, with understanding of the health of the system. So instead of having to go there just to see what's going on, you can really send your techs to where there are problems and where the homeowners need help. And then automating some of the communication to where it's not all over the phone and, ways that consumers like to interact with contractors now. And so, that's been a fun thing to tackle.
Awesome. What was your experience working with growth? What do you think growth does exceptionally well?
I think growth specifically is good at that, which is taking something brand new, understanding the process that needs to be done to find out how to collect the data, how to tweak from the learnings from the data, how to try to find product market fit for an offering or a special offering in our case. And that you really just kind of get in the weeds of going down all the way to the, nuts and bolts of the thing, and then building up both from a strategy standpoint, like next step standpoint, and then also, with help finding and building out team members to help grow that, depending on how well it goes. You can the things that don't work, and then you grow the things that do. So yeah.
Would you recommend growth to others, and what kind of companies would you recommend growth to?
Well, considering the exposure I have to time that growth uses, I don't want there to be a lot of competition for that time. But no, yeah, I would say in general, yeah. I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding that that I would recommend them because I have already done so many times, two or three times over the first couple of years.
Super interesting. What would you, from your perspective, how would you define product market fit? And when did you know that you had it? Or was there a moment, like an aha moment, where you said, I think we have it here?
So yeah, there was different parts of that. I would say the aha moment, and it wasn't product market fit, but the first aha moment was running the math of understanding that these companies are losing hundreds of dollars in a certain way, and understanding how much more economical it would be to do it in a new way. So that was one aha moment early on, and that came from feedback from contractors saying, "We would love this, make it for us," right? But then we really went into stealth mode after we did our initial research, and so we didn't really get a chance to like present the entire platform to some bigger players until we were pretty close to launch. And so, but we targeted two or three that we thought would be the best people to to get feedback from, and they all kind of got it immediately. So I think product market fit is kind of like I don't know that it doesn't happen overnight, of course, um, but I think you might be able to feel like you have it as soon as somebody tells you, yes, we'll buy this at scale, go do it, right? And that's kind of what we had early on. But then also, I think my idea of product market fit would be really just the numbers of the thing. Like, is your cost to acquire good enough, right, to make, even before, building the brand, let's say, fully, good enough to make your business work, right? And at the end of the day, like, you have product market fit if there's enough market for your product for the business to operate successfully. And so, because a lot of people will tell you, I like this, I would buy it, but until they actually do at scale, like, you don't really know. And so, yeah, I think it's a journey every company has to go through, and it has different, bends around the way, but it mostly just starts with talking and getting feedback from your customers, and then trying to deliver to them the value that they tell you they want.
Yeah, that ties into what you were saying earlier about your first set of kind of customer discovery or market discovery, where people kind of told you what you wanted to hear. Everybody wants to, encourage you and say, "Oh yeah, that's a great idea." But until somebody puts down their credit card or, is willing to sign on the dotted line when it's an enterprise deal, um, you know, words are cheap, right?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, no doubt. And even giving discounts, like, I don't consider it really fit until they're paying full freight, right? And they're willing to scale, and they're willing to, and it grows in that way. So yeah, but I think it's something you always have to be working on. Even once you found it, you have to be differentiating yourself from anybody else that might come along the pipe behind you, right? And so it's constantly you're trying to go 0 to 1, right? And then after that, then you're really just trying to get through the chasm, and then there's like a lot of different struggles along the way. But you always need to be listening to your customers to make sure that you're always finding that continued fit.
You brought up the idea of staying ahead of competitors, and I'm curious, in your space, are your conversations with prospects or potential customers, are they still a conversation of educating them on the need for a solution in this space, of like why you need this, versus it's already something that they're looking for or aware of or problem aware, and the conversation is more of why SmartAC is the best solution in this context?
It's a combination of both. I would say for the first year that we were live, it was mostly trying to explain to them a new way of going about something. I would say as we got more and more traction and more publicity in the industry, now it's been more, most people have heard about it. And there's a lot of social proof now that we didn't have even 6 months ago. And so now they walk up at a show and they say, okay, I've been hearing about this everywhere. Like, let's hear the spiel, give it to me. Right. And so I think that that puts you in a different, just especially when you're trying to teach a new way of doing something. If you don't have an open mind from them, it's futile. Right. And so getting to that, like, okay, I'm willing to entertain this as an option is really the biggest hurdle for, especially in an industry that doesn't really take change well and hasn't changed much over the last 50 years. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like exponentially different as far as results now when the ground has kind of been tilled a bit over the last year and a half.
Yeah, that's often the case. Let's talk about the nuts and bolts of landing some of these enterprise deals. You've had some big ones, and it's always challenging for a startup. You talked about educating the market, but even once they recognize a need, big companies typically move slowly. They are risk averse. Making a deal with an upstart is risky from their perspective. Walk us through how you overcome that as a founder. What are the steps? Um, and what are really kind of peering behind the curtain, if whatever you can share about, like, how do you structure a deal like that makes them at ease to go into business with you?
Yeah, so I had exactly zero experience in this area before now, and frankly, haven't taken the lead on this at our org. Andy, our COO, has a lot more experience in this area and has been really doing a great job at that. But there's different size entities and there's different like decision making structures. So if we're talking to a retail energy provider or a utility, if you're not assuming it's going to be a year plus, you're just wrong, right? And I didn't really understand that at the beginning, and that was frustrating for me. If you're talking about a 50 or $100 million operation it doesn't have a board yet, and and there's a excuse me, and there's a one person making the decision, then that can be more like a closing a homeowner, which is where my experience was before this company. So yeah, it's really difficult. I mean, B2B. With large companies is really hard, and some of the deals that are the most valuable to us now did take 8 to 12 months, and so it's just it's slow and methodical, but of course then the upside of that is that once you have those deals, it takes even longer for them to change, to think about changing their business again, right? So once you're ingrained, we hope to be able to really realize the value of these relationships as we help our partners scale over the next 3, 4, 5 years.
That's a positive silver lining there. On the flip side, that the challenge of getting in is also the stickiness that keeps you there, hopefully. Is there anything practically that you have to do when structuring a deal with an enterprise to mitigate some of these risks, existential risks from their perspective of your company potentially not surviving long enough for them to see the value? Like, how do you go about that?
Yeah, I think first of all, you just have to give them full confidence that we're not going away. That the startups on firm foundation has a plethora of different investors that are supporting the company, right? And so you have to check that box at some point for sure. And then I think when you're structuring the agreements, like both sides are trying. It's like anytime lawyers are involved, right? You're just trying to find what's the worst that could happen and what does that look like, right? And so you are spending a lot of time talking about things that potentially neither side thinks will happen, but that's the way it goes, right? And so I think it's important, especially if you're a startup and you're going to do a deal with a big company, like you have to have a firm commitment from them too that they can't break, because if God forbid you go do all the work to be able to be ready to support and deliver on that, and then for some reason something changes in the macro environment, and all of a sudden they're walking, right? And so it's really it becomes a partnership where the larger organization is looking to an innovative smaller company for something to further differentiate their brand. And then we're of course looking to the larger organization as a growth opportunity. And so it's definitely not best to have a large percent of your business in any one relationship. And so our focus has been, yes, we want to book some big wins, but also, we at a minimum want to book lots of big wins so that, there's some diversification there. But also, I think it's just important to make sure that when you're structuring the deal that your interests are really aligned the entire way. That's been one of the biggest things that I feel like I've focused on in my career is when you have two parties in a transaction, if day 1, day 100, day 1,000, the interests are aligned, like you have success together, then you don't really have to worry about the motives of either side, and it ends up being more of a fruitful partnership in my experience.
I love that point. I think that's true in most cases, like you said. How are you going about getting these deals? I understand that there's long time horizons with any enterprise deal, but channels wise, I know you're doing you have partnerships as well, and software partnerships as well as distribution partnerships. Can you talk to those?
Yeah, so we're pretty laser focused on going to contractors, though because our product is DIY capable with homeowners, we are also working on some very large possibilities with like big box and retail energy providers, where a homeowner kind of gets the product, not through a contractor, let's say. And so that's a different model for us completely. Right now, we get our like $10 a month per system that we give when the contractors deploy them, and they keep all the other revenue. When we go direct to consumer or through a big box or something like that, then they don't have a contractor relationship. Like, they look to us for that. And so what's interesting is in that situation, there should be a little bit more of the pie we might be able to take when we pass that opportunity off to a contractor, and it's a win-win, of course, because the contractor wants that lead as well. And then and then in retail energy, they have different motives, right? Their goal is to keep a loyal relationship for that utility bill or that electric bill, and to provide surprise and delight wherever they can. And so, we're looking at structures where we might have even three-way structures where the retail energy provider gets some really great benefit for their customer, and then the customer gets, maybe that subsidized somewhat, and then the contractor is kind of the third part of it. So yeah, always looking for new ways to take the product to market. But I do think it's important, and I haven't historically been great at this, but I'm getting better, to just stay focused. Once you find something that's working and it's being pulled, you have some pull instead of just push, that, have 5% of your bandwidth thinking about what the roadmap is in the next 2 or 3 years, but make sure it's at least 90-95% focused on the opportunity that's clearly going very well.
Yeah, it's so hard not to get distracted by those opportunities that come up. But it sounds like you've found success in the B2B space, and this B2C component or all parallel model is pure upside in terms of adding another layer to the cake.
Yeah, we don't even have to do it. I mean, we may not ever do it at scale, right? But if Home Depot or Lowe's or Ace Hardware or like any of these bigger players see value in being able to grow their stickiness with their relationship with filters delivery or supplying services in HVAC and plumbing, etc., then of course that's a huge opportunity for us to consider. But then you're back thinking about working with really large organizations, so you got to, there's some risks there too. So I think in general, we just want to continue to tout the value we can provide to consumers. And there are different types of businesses that will value different things about that, and that will have different business models of getting the product into the home.
Yeah, of course. Consumers are mercurial. they don't often behave the way that you want them to, both in terms of buying, but also in terms of using the product. What have you learned from the contractors that are deploying the SmartAC devices? How are you supporting the activation and retention of the end user, right? So we talked about the B2B2C. That customer, that homeowner today isn't necessarily your customer, but it's in your best interest to keep them using the product. So what have you learned around activation and retention from that regard?
Yeah, so there's kind of two parts to that. First of all, we built a platform for them to take care of something when they have a need, right? That many times is once a year, once every other 2-3 years, right? And so we didn't build the platform wanting to try to drive engagement necessarily. It's more like a security system in that way. Hopefully security systems don't want people engaging with it all the time, because that would be bad, right? And so, but on the other hand, we need to provide some similar value that the contractors were able to give when they go to the house. So the way we do that is we do monthly health reports of the systems in the home, so that the homeowner might open the first one or two and say, hey, that's cool, and then delete the next few, right, for maybe forever. But it's a reminder that the contractor's watching and that the technology is adding value in that way. And then there are a few different things that the homeowners kind of have to do, like air filters. And so taking those very few times a year where they have to think about their HVAC and plumbing systems and making those more easy, I think is really our job. But that isn't really, like I said, driving to like weekly active users. So, which is good in a lot of ways, because we just need to understand 4 or 5 use cases and nail that experience in the app when that day comes. And then those are very often very bad days for consumers. And so there's a huge opportunity to streamline those more so than most technology products.
You said earlier that people don't really think about their ACs until the day breaks. I think that's true in many categories. You think of healthcare and other, people don't really think of preventative measures. It's hard to get somebody to pay in advance of something. Of course, insurance is the big exception, but insurance is a hard sell as well, and that's why a lot of times it's mandated, right?
Yeah, it's we peace of mind ends up being a really big play for us, like insurance or security. And you try not to sell fear. That's not really the intent, but at the end of the day, like, these are really expensive systems, and it's important that you take care of them proactively in some way. You just spend 15 or 20 minutes a year thinking about them, so that you're not spending 15 or 20 hours with no comfort at some point. So I think that is it's a hard thing to get consumers to do, but the easier and the more cost effective you make it, the more people will do it.
Right. Absolutely. What's the grand vision for SmartAC? Let's fast forward 5-10 years out. What does it look like?
That's a very big question. I think in general, we see just we have some things in our roadmap on the technology side and other things that we can't speak about. But in general, I really don't think we're going to go do much more than what we've just spoken about, which is empowering contractors to make more money by having and keeping more relationships with consumers. When you use technology to scale your base of customers, and you can double, triple, quadruple the customers that look to you as their company of record, then that just has massive benefits. And then I think, some of the new use cases, like we talked about, being able to have the homeowner put the device in the house allows our company to have a little bit more revenue on average per home per year, even if it is, lumpy compared to just a straight $10 a month. But no, I think we're laser focused on that. We're not trying to really make any more sensors in the house. We're not, we're going to try to connect to some other API integration with like a whole home shutoff valve, and even like garage door openers, and like all the other things in the house. Like if someone is in an app already, the more utility you can give them to the app, the better. But no, we're laser focused on HVAC and plumbing, and outside of just potentially different paths and channels into the home, not much else. I mean, we're trying to sprint to 1 million homes as fast as possible. So I think that's probably the most succinct way of saying that. And I think there's a real good shot we can do that in the next 3 or 4 years.
Very cool. I'm particularly interested in the smart home concept, and I wonder why it hasn't taken off as much as many would have predicted. In terms of, I'm not talking about just having lights that are connected to timers. I'm talking about what you guys are building in terms of sensors and preventative care, right? The home warranty and home insurance business model seems so outdated in terms of what they know about what's actually happening with the home. Is that something that's currently happening? We just don't know about it. Are there fundamental difficulties to wiring up that fully connected home with the Internet of Things to have true insights into what's happening, in the attic, in the basement, in the walls?
Yeah, I think most of the time the biggest hurdle is just how difficult it is to accomplish. Our sensors, what makes them cool is that they're just like magnetic, like there's no wires. But I just retrofit, like I don't think you're going to see mass retrofitting ever. So until these things are like you said, built into the houses from the start, even like the connected, panels or things like that, like no one's buying a $3,000 change out of their panel. Like it's just never going to happen. But if you put it in a new house and it's a value add for the builder, that's a totally different thing, right? So I just think this transition is going to be very, very slow for anything that's more than a 10-minute install, honestly. If it's or if there's a business case for the contractor to spend an hour doing it, and the homeowner is willing to pay for all that labor and time and product, then maybe so. But yeah, I just think in general they have to be really easy, and a lot of things aren't. Even like a thermostat. I mean, I tried to install my Nest thermostat, and I'm an engineer. It just wasn't easy, right? And I didn't know what I could touch and what I couldn't touch, and like they did every single thing they could possibly do to make it better. I mean, obviously Google, it was quite the effort what they put through, but it still was like an hour, So like I think that just that hurdle for IoT is a big one. And some of the things that you've seen have the most success are the things that are just so, one button, slide, push, done, right? And so I think that's really the biggest hurdle for anything IoT related, in my opinion.
We had a fascinating startup on the founder of a startup on a couple of weeks ago, Krava. They're building these modular homes. Well, they're starting with what are called ADUs, accessory dwelling units, sheds, outdoor kind of attachments to the home. But I think that you're right that with new construction and new types of construction in the future, this is all going to be built in. But to retrofit existing homes, I think is a really tall order. But it's such a waste, in my opinion. Like the data that is available, all around us, right? But we both live in Houston, and the joke here is that if your house hasn't had foundation issues, it's going to have foundation issues. Like I'm sure that sensors can monitor that movement and warn us ahead of time, right? Things like that, and moisture and other sensors. It's all available, right?
Yeah, it's just, do people care enough to pay for it? And the answer is usually no, right? I mean, you see even in the HVAC industry, you have the system, you lose comfort, and you have two bids. You have a $15,000 bid for this one and a $20,000 bid for this one. And the $20,000 bid, you can have data in your phone, and the $15,000 bid doesn't have data. No one buys the $20,000 one, right? If they're given both options, right? Sometimes maybe they're not given both options and they buy 20 because they don't know there's a cheaper one that's not connected. But yeah, homeowners, I just don't think consumers care about data. They care about their experience. And so sometimes there's that overlap to where the data really does make their life a lot better. And like Uber or something that takes your entire experience and changes it wholesale. But then a lot of other times, I think people that make hardware and sensors, they start with data, they don't start with experience. And at that point, people aren't willing to pay for it because they don't even understand what it can do for them. So you have to show them what it can do for them first, and then they're willing to allow you to collect it because they have already fallen in love with the experience. And that's what's happening with your iPhone, right? I mean, across everything, all the experience you get that's magic is a function of data and mining and how they're able to use it to give you a better experience. But you're willing to make that trade-off when it really does make your life better.
Yeah, I agree. I think trying to get customers to adopt something like this is a super tall order. I have a suspicion that the model is going to be driven more by the like home warranty and home insurance type providers that have more incentive to solve for this. But not to get too far off tangent, let's talk about fundraising. You successfully raised Series B recently, I think, in north of 20 million, bringing your total funding for the company at around 35 million or so.
About, yeah.
If I recall correctly, the initial version of this product, you guys actually crowdsourced funding, right? Didn't you launch on Kickstarter at a certain point?
Yeah, we did. It wasn't really, I mean, most people that launch on Kickstarter aren't doing it for fundraising. They're doing it for sales. But so we were in that boat. But yeah, we were able to get some good exposure through Kickstarter early on. And but yeah, most of our fundraising has been local. Still, I would say the majority is local. And I'm a big part of that too, because when you wholesale change businesses without any product sales for years, like it's hard to fundraise. And so we've been able to do some of that with our founding team and things like that. But yeah, a lot of energy investors, a lot of smaller VCs, and cobbling together 10 and then a $20+ million round in Houston is not easy. It's a lot of meetings, and it would have been a hell of a lot easier to be out in the valley, right, where you can just sure, you get 20 no's, but it's 20 meetings, right? And you get a 21st one is a yes, and you're kind of done. But when the check sizes are a lot smaller, it's a lot more time and energy. But I will say, we're very proud that a lot of the money has been, even from the VCs and such, has been local. And so excited that it's Texas designed, and the company is being built in Texas. So but have a lot of great employees and investors and advisors in the Bay Area, because we really are trying to approach the company more similarly to how a company would approach it out there.
Got it. The pool is already smaller because, dealing with hardware in and of itself, you exclude a lot of investors, don't even go there. They're afraid of hardware. So I think that the fact that you were able to convince so many investors, and there are some strategics as well, right, that are part of the group?
A bunch of strategic investors from the HVAC industry. In fact, most of our money has come from either energy players or people in the HVAC plumbing space.
And how has that been helpful in unlocking some of those enterprise deals that we talked about earlier?
Yeah, I think it's great. At the end of the day, it's just further validation, right? It's further validation for new investors. It's further validation for the entire industry when they see, big players in the space adopting at scale. There haven't been that many like technology platforms in HVAC and plumbing that have really just kind of become billion-dollar companies, maybe just like one or two. And so a lot of these players have seen that happen and, didn't have an opportunity to have any exposure to those, right? And so I think, there's some more understanding now that it's a pretty antiquated industry in general still, although it's come a long way, and that technology is just going to continue to revolutionize it. And so I think FOMO is real, I think the second, third time around in the space. And so we've been able to partner with some great people to advise us and write, big angel checks, I guess, but not compared to a VC check, of course. But yeah, it's been really fun to kind of build an advisory board of people that know the industry better than we do in many ways. But then also we bring a fresh perspective that's useful to them as well, of course.
The advisory board, I've heard and experienced the perspectives both ways about those. Some say it's a waste of time for early stage founders, that it's kind of this, it's done for prestige and it doesn't really add value. But I've seen it work really well where, advisors are helping the founders, helping open doors, giving perspective and experience that otherwise would have taken much longer to accumulate themselves. What's been your experience in that area?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. I think in many situations, an advisor, it's really hard to add value. I advise a number of startups myself. I know you do as well. It's very difficult to add value if you have to spend an hour bringing them fully up to speed on a problem that you're trying to solve. And then at that point, they're really not going to be as up to speed as you are, right? So it's really difficult to add value. Now, in our case, if it comes to like fundraising and things like that, I think that's where there's just certain things you can't understand unless you've been in the space. So I think that's a really easy way for an advisor to add value if they're walking a founder through those hard decisions and structure and like pitfalls and avoiding those, right? In our case, our advisory board, we're talking about our customers of ours as well. So they understand the product, they understand, how other customers will use it. And so they are our target audience. And so that has been very valuable for us, even as we've, the hardware kind of is locked down and has been working great for 3+ years. But the software, we're just always adding more features and trying to add more value through the software. And so I think just the more understanding that an advisor has about your actual business and what you're trying to do, the better. And agreed, though, in general, that just because you have an advisory board with a bunch of cool logos, like that's really not valuable in and of itself, unless either one, the person just intimately knows the exact space you're working on, or two, the problems that you take to them, you can bring them up to speed on in 10 minutes and they have enough experience to like just fully, okay, I know where you're at. Here's what I would do. And that usually takes time. And so, I think having fewer advisors that are more intimately understanding how the business is going on a week, month by month, week by week basis is more valuable than having a lot of bigger names that just aren't really in the loop.
Yeah, super practical advice. I agree with that. Let's shift gears. A lot of the founders that I talked to on the podcast have gone completely remote, either intentionally or due to COVID. You have somewhat of a contrarian view there. You're very pro in office, shoulder to shoulder. in the trenches.
You think that's contrarian? I don't think that's contrarian. I think you saw big tech do it because they had to, and the second they didn't have to, they're not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't think it's. There's, you know, I guess anything could be contrary to another side, but there's only one right and one wrong.
So the other side, like you say, you're entitled to your wrong opinion, right?
Yeah, I mean, like Elon, I would say, like Elon would be kind of, a good person to look at this. I don't think anybody would disagree that he is about as good as there is of getting a lot out of his team. Sometimes that's enjoyable. Well, it's probably never enjoyable, but sometimes it's people are willing to put up with it, and sometimes they're not. But yeah, I don't. There's zero chance that you get more out of your overall team if they're distributed. It's just zero. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't some situations where if you can get an A player that you wouldn't have been able to get otherwise, because they can't be there in person, that it's not worth that trade-off. But it is a trade-off, right? So, depending on the employee, it'll be less or more of a trade-off. But yeah, I hate remote work. I hate everything about it. We have employees that work like that, and they would be more valuable to us if it wasn't that way. Doesn't mean they're not very valuable to us now, but they would be more if they were part of the day-to-day interaction. If you go read any books about any of the billion, 10, $100 billion shops, right? Go read about Facebook in its early days, and what the co-founder got, released because he wasn't there, right? It just doesn't work, So as you get bigger, it can work more, but early on, in the first number of years, especially with co-founders, I just don't understand how you could do it any other way, unless you just have like a video up 10 hours a day, right? And it's like they're there with you. But yeah, it's we have problems with it now. We have problems with our current team where we have A players that we just always have to bring up to speed, and they're just fall behind. So yeah, I'm passionate about this topic, and I've really very rarely had success, even with people that I feel like would have been very successful otherwise.
Is it a matter of trust and accountability? Is it a matter of communication?
Yeah, communication. It's not trust, or I don't think it's trust or accountability. It's just that you can't be lockstep in work environment, right? I think maybe with devs would be the one example when you have a Scrum daily, right? I think you could maybe do that, but outside of that, definitely not designers or product people or even executives. I just don't see how. And I have a lot of experience with it, and I have a lot of great people that are remote now across a few businesses I have, but they all know how I feel about it.
I like strong opinions.
Yeah. Well, then you have the right person on the podcast.
Awesome. Last question before we go to our exciting lightning round. I know you're a fan of AI and using AI in the business, whether it's within the product. Obviously, you have a lot of data models that are built into the product, but in terms of distribution, from a marketing perspective, using AI there, making the team more efficient, how have you deployed it so far, and what are you most excited about in what you're seeing coming out?
Yeah, so I think it's early. It's not early maybe for the whole industry, but it's early. It's early for home services, right, with AI deployment. So we use it a number of different ways, machine learning AI with our technology, but then I think for communication with homeowners is something that we would like to lean into even more. If you're going to try to slowly nurture a relationship for a homeowner over many years, just hoping that you get the swing at the big ticket item, then the more of that you can automate, the better. And the more customized it can be and the more real time it can be, the better. And obviously all of those things can be driven with communication, especially through AI. And then, there's some other things, even on the sales and marketing side that you can do in that way, of course. So I know you're very big into it, and I'm very bullish on what it's going to do for a lot of these companies too, but I wouldn't call myself anywhere close to an expert. We have a whole team that does that type of stuff on the technology side. But yeah, it's more scary to me than anything else. Not necessarily take over the world scary, but just scary in that how behind a company can get if they don't deploy it over the next 5 or 10 years. And that just means that a lot of companies it's going to be more of a negative than a positive, because if they don't adopt, they're going to get run over by competition from a COGS standpoint, especially. So, and from an experience standpoint, once people understand how consumers like to interact with it. So yeah, it's early, but a lot of interesting things going on for sure.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. All right, that brings us to our lightning round. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. Sound good?
Sure.
All right. What's one book, newsletter, and/or podcast that you find yourself recommending most often?
Most often, I'm reading the biography now of Elon, but an autobiography or anything about Elon is what I recommend usually.
Okay. What's one terrible piece of advice that you've received in your career?
Oh, that's a tough question. Man, nothing comes to mind immediately. Yeah, I think I focus mostly on positive things and just can't pull anything in the moment.
All right. Pass is acceptable. Who's a mentor of yours who's had the most impact on your life or career?
Honestly, I don't have a lot of mentors, but I've had a few people that I've worked with. Honestly, worked with a guy named Billy Grandy here in Houston for a long time, who had been in tech before and was able to say, "Hey, look, here's the methodology of how you run a tech startup. Right? Here's how you fall in line and do things a certain way." So I think I learned a whole lot from Billy. My father taught me a whole lot about home improvement, and that was kind of my first company and first success. And so that was a huge boon as well. So I would say those two would have been the most impactful.
Fantastic. You just mentioned kind of learning about what a tech startup is, right? You were a founder previously, but it was in more kind of traditional services business. Do you ever have imposter syndrome as a tech founder of like, I'm not one of those like engineers or Bay Area type founders? And if so, how do you combat that?
No, I think it's been a strength for me to be able to have been a contractor in the past. Understanding the buying decisions of homeowners is really the one thing I feel like I'm an expert on. I don't think I'm really an expert as a tech founder by any stretch, but understanding consumer buying psychology is kind of my jam. And so that, coupled with putting together a team on the technology side that are experts in that side, I think is very valuable. But no, I mean, yeah, part of me wishes that I mean, we considered moving out to the Bay Area early on just to be part of it and have all those benefits or whatever with talent, things like that. But no, not imposter syndrome. I think just in general, being in Texas, you have to go about it in a little bit different way, and that can be a disadvantage, but sometimes it can be an advantage. And over the next 3 or 4 years, having pools of investors that aren't VCs as much, right, could have some advantages if everything kind of tanks, right? Which we hope is not going to happen in the market, or especially in the VC market. But yeah, I think it's just is what it is.
Well, I'm glad you stayed in Houston. We need more tech companies started here. Two more. What's a common misconception that people have about you?
I don't know. I don't know. That's an interesting question. I would say maybe I think empathy isn't like my strongest thing, so I think I don't show it well. So maybe thinking that I don't care as much about people as I actually do. So maybe that would be one that would come to mind. Very mission like focused and not necessarily people focused day in day out, not as much as I like to be, but generally I feel it. I just don't always express it, and I focus on the 3% let's change instead of the 97% that people are doing well. So maybe that would be my answer, I would say.
So you care, but it's not at the surface, or it's not as visible.
Yeah, I care. I just don't really necessarily care about letting everyone know how much I care all the time. So
That's fair. All right, last one. What is a core value that you live by or try to live by?
the main one would be just conducting and operating in life the way the Bible teaches. I would say would be one of the main ones. I think winning and not going about it the right way is not winning to me, right? So I think in general, just high integrity would be the main one. From a business standpoint, I think core value or operating principle would be what I mentioned earlier, but aligning interest. I think that's probably the most important concept and strategic thing that I've done in my career is just making sure that the people that are working closest with me, that have the most impact on the company's success and my success as well, and that I've incentivized them correctly. And so I think that has been the way that I've been able to step away from businesses that were successful and go to others. And I think that's a really, really important thing. For startups especially, which is exciting because everybody at the startup has equity in the company, and that makes it a lot more fun. So it's easier to do it in this space than it is in others, but in every space, I think it's very important.
Fantastic. Josh, thank you so much for sharing your story, your insights, and your advice. Anything that you want to close us out with, anything that we missed, and also how can people reach you if they want to continue the conversation, or how can they be helpful to you? I'll put all of those links in the show notes.
Nothing I think we missed. One thing I would say is we are growing rapidly, so it is hard to find amazing tech talent in Houston. So if there's anybody out there in Houston or willing to relocate to Houston, then definitely hit me up. Josh@smartac.com is the email, and anybody in the HVAC space that's looking to grow their business, if you haven't already heard about us, we'd love to tell you what we're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Josh. We'll
Thanks
be in touch. Thank you.
Appreciate it.